All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 44 of Going Live with Good Soil Investments. Um, Matt and I are here again to chat about the latest macro market news as usual. We'll talk about Tesla stuff, Twitter, the acquisition. We were just touching base on the kind of early pre-chat about Twitter Spaces because we do this, it's on our recorded for our YouTube channel. We're also doing this on Twitter Spaces live as well, and it's also being recorded on Twitter Spaces. But we were just talking about Twitter Spaces. There's a lot of room for improvement, and hopefully Elon will, his influence when he kind of takes over will quickly improve the Spaces, because I feel like they made an initial push to get the Spaces out, and now it's kind of languished and has all these bugs and issues that no one's really fixing, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's like it seems like some low-hanging fruit just to kind of improve the search function of Spaces, for example, or even just kind of recommending things. And I've noticed
Yeah.
I only ever tend to see Spaces recommendations on the mobile app, but I never see it on desktop. So
Hmm.
it just seems so strange that they've got this kind of low-hanging fruit, and they're spending so much money on like all their O&M infrastructure, and paying their chief censor, what was it, like 14
Yeah.
million a year or something like that.
17 million a year.
17
Yeah.
million a year. Yeah, just like, crazy. They're spending lots of money, but in all the wrong areas. So I think there's a lot that can be done to improve the user experience, while also probably really making this a good investment for Elon and whoever else ends up in the deal.
Yeah, yeah, and Elon's been tweeting about it the last few minutes I saw before when we were getting ready to come on. I mean, he's really got ideas to make this a
Yeah.
world communication forum. And I responded to one of the probably someone from Elon's shadow crew. Which I responded. He tweets sometimes, and Elon responds to his tweets sometimes. And I responded saying like, yeah, even because he it was the interview at the gala. Like some people were asking him questions, and Elon was saying he's going to make it. And I think I responded saying something like, yeah, maybe even in China, he'll somehow get Twitter authorized there. And then like a bunch of people like responded like, you don't know anything about the CCP, but it'll never be available in China. And I wouldn't say never. I mean, it doesn't seem likely, of course, but with Elon, you can't say never. Nothing seems to be impossible with Elon. So I'm hopeful that he does turn this into like a real global communication service. It'd be really impressive, really interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree. It sounds unlikely that it would be in China anytime soon, but it's possible. And I think people don't um, like. I don't think they give Tesla and Elon enough credit for how good of a relationship he has with the government there. I mean, just with there was the article that came out today on the Shanghai plant reopening, and how much the local government in particular really kind of came to the rescue to help make sure that the plant could open. They were kind of like arranging disinfecting crews to come, and like it was some huge number of like buses and vans that were dropping the workers off. That required a lot of local coordination. So
Yeah,
yeah, I'm not banking on that happening. Certainly not anytime soon. To open up
yeah.
Twitter to to the Chinese, to China,
Yeah, they
but
have Weibo right now, but yeah, I
yeah.
mean, maybe there's some way they could work together down the. I mean, just don't know how things will change in the next 5 years. What kind of leverage, if any, Elon could potentially have with the Chinese government, or maybe just has a really good relationship with the Chinese government over time. Who knows? It could go a lot of directions. But if there's any chance, it's much. The chances are increased with Elon at the helm versus previous management. So we start with macro markets. Let's go on to the macro markets now that probably enough people got on. So I mean, the big thing is the FOMC meeting, right? That's tomorrow.
Yep.
I guess 1 p.m. Eastern time is when we find out the decision, and it's 50 basis points is pretty much a sure
It's
thing,
like, if it's
right?
not that, it's like a huge surprise, right? And
Yeah,
like if it's 25 basis points, I don't know that the market would necessarily think that's good news. Potentially they could, but if it's 75 basis points, that'd be bad news for sure. But 50 base, like everyone expects 50, so I can't imagine they'd stray from that, right?
yeah. I think you're right. Yeah, 50 basis points is like a sure thing. If they stray from it, just too much risk and too much uncertainty. Markets will get frazzled potentially. Um, so 50 basis points. The big thing I think everyone's watching, the most important thing though is the language, and if they
Yeah.
telegraph, the likelihood or set up the possibility for 75 basis points rise in the next meeting. And if they do that, I'm not sure how the market will take it. If they don't do it and they don't say anything about 75 in the future, I think maybe the market is rallies on that and feels more certain. But if they kind of like throw some language in, like, yeah, we could increase it to 75 or 100 basis points in future meetings or something like crazy, then I wouldn't be surprised if the market panics. But I don't. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I kind of expect. Well, first of all, I agree with you that if that were to happen, the market definitely would panic. But it seems more likely to me, especially with the kind of huge sell-off we've seen in the last couple of weeks, with equity markets looking bad, and want to take a minute in a second to talk about the GDP numbers too. We had kind of a
Yeah,
surprise contraction in Q1. So all the kind of indicators are, that the economy is really in a tenuous situation. Um, so, given that kind of risk that's out there, I think they're going to be very hesitant to, um, telegraph any sort of signals that are, kind of
cause
um,
panic.
cause panic, yeah, in markets. So I think they're going to try to be a calming force with their language that they put out there.
Yeah.
They can't go too aggressively. I think the risk of cooling down the economy too much is probably greater than the risk of inflation at this point. But certainly they've got a very tough job to kind of keep those two in in balance.
Yeah, and the volatility index, the VIX, still above 30 as we're talking right now. It's down, a bit today, but yesterday when the market was kind of down, we were looking at it and talking. I think it was like 36 or it was getting into the high 30s, and like anything above 30 to me is kind of like, holy moly, that's like that's that anything above 30 is ridiculously high. I feel like it's like it shouldn't stay above 30 for very long. It's like, man. So I think if they do some telegraph some language about it, the market potentially the Fed raising rates significantly more in the next meetings, that VIX could go up to like the 40s, or I think during the COVID crash it got to like the 50s, very
Oh, geez.
temporarily. Yeah, it was like insane.
Yeah,
It was
it's
like the
been
highest. Yeah.
so volatile lately. I mean, like even just yesterday, markets were up and down and up and down, and like pre-market trading and futures on Sunday night were like just like kind of ramping up and down, and then like in the last hour of the day, there was just this huge rally. It's
Yeah.
just so bizarre. The markets can't figure out where to go next. So
They don't know.
there's
Yeah.
there's a lot of money on
On the
shorts right
sideline.
now, and there's
And
a lot
this
of money
and
that's just been pulled off on the sideline. So
yeah.
I think people are not sure how to kind of redeploy or when to redeploy. Nobody wants to take all the money that they've sidelined and put it back into the market right before a sudden 10% crash, which given how April went, it was the worst month since
Yeah.
2008.
Yeah.
Um,
And as
for
cheap as it
for
feels like these growth stocks are getting, some being cut by 70, 80, 90% even, look at Teladoc, it's down like ridiculous. We were looking at that the other day. I mean, as cheap or inexpensive as these, growth and tech stocks seem, it doesn't mean they can't get even much cheaper. Like the market can stay irrational, just like on the upside when you had stocks like, Rivian or Lucid at like 150 billion market cap valuations. That was so irrationally on the upside, it felt like, but it was short lived, but it was up there for a little while. But you just didn't know how
Mhm.
irrational it could go on the upside. I think the same thing could happen on the downside. You just don't know how deep the shock in growth and tech stocks could really hit. Like, if the market's kind of panicking, mass hysteria in the market, it could create really irrational. You just want to kind of be ready and have something ready to maybe buy more as it gets really low potentially. So yeah, it's interesting, an interesting setup here. We haven't seen markets like this in a while.
Yeah, yeah, and I want to talk about the GDP numbers for a little bit too, because that was a huge surprise. Really, nobody was expecting the contraction that we saw in
Yeah.
for Q1. But digging into the details a little bit, one of the biggest issues dragging down GDP was actually a decrease in inventory purchases, particularly around automotive, actually, but it was kind of
Hmm.
across the board. So that was one thing that we were kind of talking about in our interview series with Vuk, our very first one back in February, was the inventory levels had been so crazy high, um, that it's kind of stood to reason that there wouldn't be as much purchasing for inventories. So technically, the way that runs through the reporting is it will show up as a contraction on GDP because sequentially you had kind of this like overbuying of inventory during COVID. And now that needs to be unwound. And on top of that, you've got supply chain issues, and especially on the automotive side, you've got a lot of plants shut down.
Yeah.
Not Tesla so much, but all the traditional OEMs have major issues with supply chain and plants not up and running. So if you're trying to find the signal through the noise in that number, one of the things I'm seeing is the consumer spending seems really high. The kind of true, I would say, indicators of strength and like resilience in the economy seem to be quite strong. But there's a drawdown in the inventories and kind of ongoing supply chain issues. To me, those are more short-term issues that aren't necessarily indicative of a economy that's in shambles or about to be. So I was slightly encouraged, I would say, when digging through that level of detail to see, all right, there's some good news even in what looks on the surface to be a very disturbing GDP print.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you dig into the details. I'm not as good at digging into the details, but my bird's eye view was like, yeah, we're in a recession right now, and that's a good news.
Hmm.
That was a good indicator for me because I feel like the market's been waiting for this. Everyone's talking about, are we going to be in a recession? Are we going to be in a recession? What when next year? 50% chance, if not 2023, 80% chance. There's all these like odds coming out. And I feel like let's just get it over with. Let's just get the recession print done. One more quarter, especially with Shanghai shutdowns and more supply chain, shock to inventories and such, perhaps from the last months, like, China shut down, it seems like, from COVID, and more inflation issues. And hopefully, I kind of hope in a weird way that like there's another print for this quarter to be also just barely negative. That last one, people say it was negative it was at a rate of negative 1.4%. I think it was like negative 0.3% for the quarter or something like that. So
Okay.
maybe next quarter will be negative 0.1% or negative 0.2% or whatever, but just barely negative. And then I think that would be great because then we could say, oh, we're officially in a recession, and then
Yeah.
that puts like the bottom into the macro market a little bit psychologically for people, because I think people are scared of the word recession. I mean,
Yeah.
depression and recession are similar. And it's like, when people talk about that, our economy's heading into a recession or depression. And it's like people want to pull their money out of savings, put it under their bed. It's just a bad atmosphere, I think, for investing. And so if we can just kind of move past it and forward, then people understand, oh, this is the best time to actually invest when we're in the recession because that's the lows. And maybe the market kind of rebounds and people are comfortable invested in stocks again, because right now there's just so much on the sidelines. Interest rates are high or getting higher. And so you have asset managers, I think, pulling money, kind of, a tide of money from asset managers sort of slowly coming out of the stock market towards like interest rates or just cash on the sidelines because of uncertainty with the recession. And so, things just move in ebbs and flows and tides. And I'm just waiting for the signals to line up for the tide to kind of reverse and come back to the markets, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree. I mean, Evan Glansman in the comments says, it's ironic that people are talking about a coming recession and they don't realize that they're already in it. And it's
Yeah.
kind of true. Like, in Q1, we definitely were already in it. Assuming right now that we have kind of another, if Q2 ends up being a negative GDP print, then yeah, we absolutely would be in the middle of a technical recession right now. So it's a lagging indicator. And so I think as investors, we need to kind of be cognizant of that and say, okay, the print may not come for another 3 months on what's happening here, but what's the world going to look like after that point? And one of the things I keep thinking about is if inflation is really as bad as people think it might be, if you're talking about 8, 9, 10%, hopefully not that high, but
No. Yeah.
if inflation is that high, do you really want your money on the sidelines, like just losing 8% a year? Like eventually, it seems that equities are going to have to cash is going to have to go back into equities as a something of a safe haven. Could go into bonds as well. There's a lot of different asset classes that it could be redeployed to. But I think in an inflationary environment, probably the last place you actually want your cash is just in a bank account earning like 0.5%.
Yeah.
So
You're losing money based on inflation with that. Yeah.
it's a guaranteed loss. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think last year, what did the S&P return last year for the year? Like 17 or I forget, let me see. I can't remember exactly what that. Anyone in the comments remember what the
It was
S&P
like
did
I
for
thought it was slightly
2021?
over 20%, if I'm not mistaken, or
Okay.
maybe it was somewhere around there, I think.
Okay. And in the trailing 12 months, the S&P has returned like zero, I think, because it's down for this year or something like that. I think I heard. So if inflation has been 5 or 7% for the last 12 months, then you actually, the S&P has really underperformed. You almost have to take that away from the S&P performance too, in a way.
Yeah.
And so you got to think equities are gonna, come back. There's good companies out there. Tesla, why don't we start talking about Tesla? I mean, that's the number one company we think in the future. And the S&P 500, it's already one of the top, 5 or 6 companies in S&P, and within a few years, it'll probably be the number one. And it's just, I think that's an example of one of those really good companies that you're just going to get a great return on capital over time with. So, I mean, Tesla, Elon was selling stock last week for the Twitter. We kind of suspected that maybe that was possible. You and I disagreed a little bit, but we won't
You were
revisit
right.
who
I'll
was
give you the
right.
edge.
I don't know, but we could have, but he did sell $8 or $9 billion of stock, and to me that was almost a good sign, because the market, even though the stock market was kind of volatile, I think Nasdaq was down 3% and Tesla was down 10% one day that he was selling. It just seemed off. The next day Tesla was, down a couple percent when the Nasdaq was up 1 or 2%. It just seemed off, and so the fact that he got that selling done with, and that was the reason, I think that's a good thing. It removes a lot of uncertainty from institutional investors who are kind of nervous if Elon has to sell more stock or not. But also it makes it a much more attractive, like, base point for Tesla stock to be at from a fundamentals perspective. Now we're at like 900 billion market cap valuation instead of a trillion market cap, which it probably would have been if Elon didn't sell, for example.
Yeah.
And so it's just a more attractive, like, forward PE, more attractive on all fundamental measures to buy and own the stock, I feel like, for anyone.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, one of the things I'm incredibly bullish on Tesla right now, obviously, but I'm trying to kind of attack my own bullishness, like a steelman argument. What's the like legitimate bear case argument from here? And I think the most legitimate one is that the macro pain kind of continues, and you've got like PE compression for the next couple of years. So then, instead of like a trailing PE of about 100, which is about what they're trading at right now, maybe it goes down to like worst case scenario 60 or something like that. And so then you
Hmm.
roll out your forward estimates and apply, a pretty serious compression, and then it's okay. Well, how realistic are those numbers? And
Yeah.
ultimately, I think it's like very unlikely that you'd have like 2 years from now a trailing PE of 60. But even if you do, I think analysts are underestimating so much how profitable Tesla is going to be 2 years from now, that even with those kind of very conservative assumptions, I'm still thinking that's like one of the safest places to put money right now is in Tesla. So I love it because there's huge upside potential if they can solve autonomy and all the stuff that we talk about all the time. But at the same time, it seems like a pretty conservative investment as well, when you really give credit to the downside scenarios that I think are most legitimate.
Yeah, it's like you get the best of both worlds. You get almost like a safe value stock in a way. Like, you can see it becoming like a value stock in a few years if it stays at these valuations, for example. But it's a super fast growing value. So you get like the growth of like a growth stock. So it's like, I feel like, this is the most comfortable I've been in owning Tesla stock than I've ever been, at this point. Like a year ago, we were nervous. It'd run up to like a trillion super fast. And I don't know, we talked about selling like those, puts and such. It just seemed a little quick, and we couldn't quite envision, see around the corner for the 60 forward PE or whatever, that kind of multiple. Like, the gross margins hadn't improved to where they are yet right now and
Yeah.
such. But now, a year later, and we can see around the corner and see some of these improvements and margin efficiencies, and it just feels like the safest time to own the stock that I've ever felt, to be honest. So I'm excited, or I'm not even, it's almost, I wouldn't say excited. I'm just like, I'm happy that I own the stock, and for all the people who are part of our community that own the stock and are intending to hold it long term. I'm happy because I know we're all going to be wealthier in the medium to long term because of it. You just don't know what's going to happen the next year or two, obviously, with the macro markets, but long term, it just feels like as close to a sure thing as any stock I've ever owned.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's
But not investment advice. None of this is investment advice. We're just, we have to be careful. We're not registered investment advisors. Um,
yeah,
but the opposite of that, we did have an interesting discussion about Rivian on our channel. I don't know if anyone, on Twitter Spaces or on listening on the live stream listens to our recorded interviews that we post on our YouTube channel. But we had a really, I'm happy Ted and
Robert.
Robert came on for they own Rivian R1T trucks, but they also own Rivian stock. And so they were nice enough to come on and talk about their product experience, but also to talk about their case for owning the stock. They also, I think, both own Tesla stock, and they're more, maybe to a larger degree than Rivian or not. I'm not sure, but yeah, what were your thoughts about that Rivian discussion, man? I mean, they were super nice to go over. We picked their brains a little bit. I'm not sold on the Rivian stock, but what did you think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it was talking to them. It was helpful because they are like, especially I think it was Robert was like a very kind of true believer. So like he loves the product. He's like super into the company. He thinks it's like the best thing since sliced bread, basically. But
Yeah,
kind of trying to break apart. We always want to break apart the product from the investment opportunity. So
hmm,
when we're really trying to break down, okay, what do they see as the most kind of bullish opportunity? I was concerned from their point of view that they seemed not to be emphasizing the importance of like manufacturing, very
yeah.
much.
And that's something
Uh,
Elon brings up is the product is
yeah,
not necessarily the car; it's actually maybe the factory. But anyway, go on.
Yeah, so I mean, they were talking about like a valuation of 400 to 500 million dollars in the next couple of years,
400 to
just
500
based.
billion.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, yeah, billion. For
Maybe it should be 400 to 500 million. Actually, I'd buy it maybe if it was down to that low level. I'd buy some
yeah,
Rivian
if it was
stock.
trading at 10% of cash or something like that, sure.
Yeah,
Um, no, but I think those sort of numbers don't make any sense to me, absent some huge kind of software margins, because the current vehicles are really kind of a niche product. I kind of view them as like a Jeep or like a Range Rover. Like they're going to appeal very well to a certain demographic that kind of aligns with the brand ethos, but without the kind of focus on manufacturing efficiency, and on top of that with the huge O&M build out that they have. I just really struggle to see them becoming profitable, even if you could assume that they can raise prices, 2x from where they are, and you can increase demand to like 500,000 a year, which both of those seem unlikely. So,
hmm,
so given how unlikely I think it is for them to kind of get to healthy levels of profitability with the R1S and the R1T, even at full scale, I think the bull case really comes down to me to like the delivery vehicles and or some software, focused on kind of last mile deliveries and like the UPSs and FedExes and Amazon Primes of the world. So to me, that was kind of the bull case, but I didn't really see a very clear path of how they do that in say the next 2-3 years. So
yeah,
I don't know. I kind of came away from it. I don't want to say bearish, but unconvinced of the upside, I'd say. But what were your
yeah.
thoughts?
Yeah, I'm definitely more on the bearish side for Rivian, I think, overall. And I was going into the interview, and I still am. I get that they have a great truck that's, amazing. Some people that own it just rave about it and love it, and that's awesome. Um, but it's $120,000 truck, and it's probably going up in sticker price. They tried to raise
Yeah,
prices recently, for example. So it's kind of like Tesla and the Model S when it first came out. It was like the super expensive car, but it was the first of its kind. It was the first EV that was like an amazing EV. I guess you
yeah,
could say this is the first amazing EV pickup truck, but it's sort of a niche within a bigger genre.
yeah,
Um, so I just don't know where they can go from there. There's so many things that would have to come together, exactly right for Rivian to justify its current valuation, even in my mind. I just don't see all those things going together. And I don't. And it's just, you know, 30 billion market cap right now, and I think they delivered 1,200 trucks last quarter. So it's still super early days, but are they going to be delivering 100,000 trucks like 2 years from now in a year, or a quarter? I really doubt it,
I doubt it, but they need, like, to justify the valuation, they probably need to be doing a lot more than that. So that's
Yeah, they need
where,
to be on pace to be on higher. So they need in 2 years they need to be 100,000, so that in 3 or 4 years they could be at like 500,000. They need to be on that kind of pace, and I just don't
right,
see that happening with them. Like their factory is nothing. I haven't visited their factory. I mean, maybe if Sandy Munro went to their factory and came back and gave some big analysis that was like, "Well, this is as best as I've seen of any factory. It's on par with Tesla." Then maybe I'd be like, "Well, let me think about it harder," because maybe if Sandy Munro, who I trust, says that the Rivian factory is like incredible, and on par with Tesla's, then maybe there is
yeah.
something there. Yeah, but I just
I
don't see that happening.
And yeah, I mean, anecdotally, like I've heard from some people who claim to, be employees at that factory in Illinois, and they've said like
Mhm.
the downtime is like horrendous. Like
Oh,
seems like there's like extended periods of like outage on a regular basis. And I mean, we had the negative 700% gross margin for Q4, which was like atrocious. And granted that was their first quarter of scaling production, but Tesla never had anything close to that. And
yeah,
like Elon responded to that one tweet a while ago about like how they were going to introduce the new, dual motor variant instead of just only the quad. And Elon was
yeah,
like, the negative gross margins will be staggering. And so I think that
yeah,
that's a real concern, that they're so focused on kind of improving the product that they're not spending enough time thinking about the cost of each of these different variations that they're offering, and how
yeah,
to introduce those into a manufacturing environment that is struggling just to get off the ground, let alone have 1,800 different options. Like,
yeah,
granted, they don't have as
yeah,
many options as like a normal Ford F-150 or something like that. There's not like 18 different packages with different trims and all these different options, but it's
yeah,
still, in my mind, too many variants, too many different choices for the consumers, for a
yeah.
company that's just starting out and frankly struggling on cost.
Yeah, and they don't even have, the even like they have some good service apparently, but they can't keep that up for long without dragging their costs to so, way up there. And like the third party charging, it's not Rivian's fault, but Robert on the first part of the chat, he was going over his long story about driving and stopping at Electrify
That was
America
horrifying, by the
things.
way. Like
Horrifying
I
experience to not be able to feel confident on stopping at charging spots and having to call up Electrify America to get them to do it. And then Rivian, their car shut down. Rivian's calling him constantly, trying to get him to fix his car. It was just, it sounds like a terrible time.
yeah,
And you
like
don't, and
I didn't
we didn't
want to.
like pick him. We didn't pick him for that anecdotal story. It just happened to come up like, and it's interesting. Like I picked him to come on our channel because he was really interested and he loved the car. And then it just happened to be that he did a road trip and he had all these issues, and that's not a coincidence to me. I
Yeah,
expect that like maybe half of Rivian owners are having issues like that are trying to test the product.
yeah. I mean, for anyone who didn't hear the story, I mean, he did a road trip from Texas to Colorado, and it sounded like the road trip from hell. We were trying not to pile on and be like, "Oh my gosh, like that is like
Yeah,
I can't believe you put up with that." But like, you know, early adopters are going to have more patience for
we
that stuff than the
yeah,
mainstream. And like this road trip sounded awful, and I was thinking like, there's no way I would ever sign up to do a road trip with that technology when
no,
those are the sorts of issues. And granted, that'll get better over time, but I don't know how you catch up with superchargers. Like no other automaker really has a legitimate plan in my mind to
yeah,
tackle that. So
yeah,
but it wasn't even just that. I mean, there were a host of other issues that he brought up that just sounded awful. So I
yeah.
hope they figure it out, because Tesla can't be the only company solving these issues. But boy, they've got a long way to go.
Yeah, I kind of feel like Tesla is the only company capable of solving these issues. The more we learn about these other companies, whether and yeah, we drank a lot. We drink a lot of the Tesla Kool-Aid. We've been drinking it. We're drunk on the Tesla Kool-Aid, but it tastes good. The Rivian Kool-Aid, I don't know. That doesn't taste so good. You drink a little bit, you spit it out. It's like, oh, I don't want this. It's just
Yeah.
not. It's not for me.
So I was thinking about like the broader, market. How is it going to shake out? And I think because Tesla has such a better experience, and they've got so much lower cost than anybody else, that they're going to be able to maintain this pricing power where they will be able to, I think, meet as much demand as there is. Because like we saw this with the Super Bowl commercials, GM and Ford are advertising their electric
Yeah,
offerings, and all the
everyone
sales go to
searches it and they
Tesla.
go to Tesla. Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's like all the other players, because they're going to have an inferior experience and worse costs, like they're going to be basically playing at break even, I think. You know, like the only lever I think they're really going to have is either like niche branding, like Rivian has a little bit, or just cutting costs. So like
I
you'll
would
have
love to
like
get
a
a couple
Volt
of,
or something like that.
yeah. Maybe we can get a couple of Lucid owners on at some point to talk about Lucid too, because it's a similar boat to Rivian in a lot of ways. They're different products, but similar in some ways too. But Rivian, the only bull case I personally, I mean, we could be wrong. Rivian could outdo us and be the new, you know, could have. I would be
I
super
would love to
surprised
see
once
what
like
set of scenarios unfolds where that's the case.
I
But
don't know.
sure.
Yeah, but the only thing I would buy Rivian if it was like the mid single digit billion market cap. I would buy it just because I think it would be a takeout target for like 10 or 12 billion maybe from like Amazon or Ford or someone would try to merge with, you know. So if Rivian really came down to like single digit billion, so if the stock came down to like $5 or $10 a share, you know, I could see maybe buying it in the hopes that someone takes it out for Apple or whoever wants to get in the EV game and sees Rivian's technology as a good way to leapfrog or get a head start and buys them for 10 or 15 billion. But I just don't know if anyone's going to buy them even at, you know, 10 or 15, 20 billion. I think just too, I don't know. I don't know for sure where these valuations come from, to be honest, but I could see like the addressable market is huge and some big company saying, you know, well, let's take a flyer on Rivian and buy them for 10 or 20, but I just don't see 30 billion. That just seems way too high to like take a flyer on Rivian to buy them at this price. So
yeah, I agree. I mean, I kind of think I'm thinking about it a little bit in terms of like the rocket, the space market as well. Like Tesla's the clear number one in EVs, just like SpaceX is the the clear number one in the space industry.
yeah,
And it's just so funny to me because like Rocket Lab is far and away the clear number two. I don't even know how you can argue with that
yeah,
right now.
yeah,
But their market cap is what are they trading at right now? They've been hit pretty hard
yeah,
recently.
been hard. Yeah,
So
they're at
they're at
3
3
billion,
billion. So
3.3 billion. Yeah.
So they're at about 3% of the leader's market cap. Now, obviously, SpaceX isn't publicly traded, but SpaceX being at around $100 billion, Rocket Lab is 3% of that. But Rivian is now trading at about 3% of Tesla. But in my mind, they're nowhere near like a clear number two. Like
Yeah,
they might
nowhere
be
near
there,
clear.
but they don't have the types of advantages that Rocket Lab has in my mind. So to me, it's kind of interesting that like if you're looking at those two different markets, how um, you know, Rivian seems to be getting more credit than it deserves, and conversely, Rocket Lab seems to not be getting the credit that their capabilities would indicate they do deserve.
Yeah. I see boiled down is saying how much are the $7.50 puts on Rivian? They're kind of expensive. The puts are expensive for Rivian. I think there's we looked at them in the past. We've looked at them, but the puts on Rivian are expensive. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, options on everything are expensive right now. With VIX
that's
over 30,
true.
like we were saying, it's just it's
Yeah,
a tough time to be buying premium right now.
it is. It is a tough time. So yeah, Rivian, we've talked about them a lot. I really thank Ted and Robert for coming on. You know, there's a lot of people that own Rivian stock out there. There's like, and they have their reasons, but I just can't get myself to be on the same page as the reasons to own Rivian. But you know, that's when people make money. When everyone else thinks you're wrong and you're actually right, that's when you can make the most money. You know, that's for many years that was Tesla. Everyone thought Tesla was the biggest short you could short, and eventually it was right to own Tesla, and that's when people made a lot, right? So same thing, maybe Rivian. Who knows? Maybe we're completely wrong in Rivian. We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
So what's next on our agenda? Should we just go? Well, I guess one more thing, a
To,
couple notes on Tesla real quick. The Shanghai is back to 80% production, and they just announced kind of a new factory that'll be done in 2023, right? That's a pretty big deal. What do you think about that?
So that's first of all, like really great news for Q2 that they're back up to 80% already. I mean, the fact that they've got that production back online as fast as they have, I think is a testament to the Tesla team and the whole crew there in Shanghai. So I'm like kind of surprised by that. And then they also announced that 500,000 incremental units coming online. So they're going to build a second factory, it sounds like, in Shanghai. So they'll be at 1.5 million units altogether in a couple of years, probably. So,
Wow.
yeah, I mean, the future is exciting for sure. But Yeah,
And
I'm just like surprised. I was kind of thinking Q2 was going to be a disaster, and we just have to kind of get through it, and then we'd have all this good news in the second half. But now I'm thinking, all right, Q2 might be pretty decent.
yeah, it
I'd be
might be
surprised
decent.
if it's
Fremont
like
is
on par
stepping
with
up.
Q1, but it could be okay.
Yeah. Martin Muldoon just said that Elon posted they have 110,000 employees just now. Is that true? Let me look at my Twitter. Uh, yes, he did. Tesla's now over 110,000 direct jobs and roughly 500,000 indirect if you factor in suppliers. Wow, thanks for the note, Martin, the update there. That's they're growing. I remember just 100,000. I feel like a couple months ago, so they're growing fast as usual, and they're going to be the biggest company in the world. They're going to have maybe I wonder what their maximum global employees will be before it subsides, the more bots, taking over, more of the humanoid robots taking over. They might get up to like 300,000 or 500,000 employees, and all of a sudden you see it coming down slowly as bots take over. I don't know. I wonder if that'll happen.
Could be interesting.
Yeah,
Before we go to questions, did you watch the Rocket Lab launch yesterday?
I did. I watched it live with my kids in the car, and they were all into it. I watched Everyday Astronaut. He does a great job, kind of emceeing it, and yeah, we watched it, and I described it to my kids, and they were all fascinated. And we saw the parachute come down. And it looked like they caught it, and then there was a where the crowd all went like, oh, and he couldn't figure out. No one could figure out what that was about, but we assumed they just caught it, and they were like, we weren't sure there was something, but apparently they dropped it. The helicopter pilot dropped it shortly after he caught it because it created like an unusual disturbance in the helicopter. He just didn't want to take a chance, and I understand that. That's fine.
Yeah,
So I think overall it was a
for
great
safety
success, though.
reasons.
Yeah,
Yeah, I had a similar situation. I watched it with, my whole family. So all six of the kids and my wife were crowding around there watching it. And it was just so fun. Honestly, it kind of reminded me of watching launches like that with my dad, back when I was a kid. And he's the one who kind
yeah,
of got me interested in space. And so,
yeah.
I think there's, as Elon says, like it's something to be excited about. And if you can't get excited about the future, then, it's kind of a sad existence. So I'm
Yeah.
just really excited to be able to share this kind of exciting new future with my kids, and just can't wait to I can't even imagine, because there's no way my dad could have imagined that like we'd be catching rockets and like reusing them and like all the
Or
crazy
landing
stuff
them
that's happening right
vertically and
now.
all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah,
It
like there's
it's
no way
incredible.
he would have thought that was possible, by the year 2022, catching them with
Yeah.
helicopters and everything. And so I can't imagine how exciting it's going to be, fast forward 30 years from now, what it's going to look like.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, another stock that we don't talk about that we have is Roblox, and I saw Stan Marge put a question in saying like are we doing any plays around earnings because their price to sales ratio is getting very low. Um, Yeah, we're not doing anything short term. We don't really talk about specific trades, but yeah, I mean, it's just the options, calls, and puts are super expensive right now, and you just don't know how long we're going to be kind of in this lower valuation range. But we're still believers in Roblox and Rocket Lab and Lemonade and Tesla. Um, so yeah, let's go to Q&A. I guess we got about 20 or 25 minutes for Q&A. If we don't, let's have the first ones come up. Alec puts up from on YouTube. MRS 13652 says, let's say Shanghai, Fremont, Texas, and Berlin produce 6 million vehicles together once fully ramped. Do you think they can make another 14 million per year from other sources by 2030? I think so for sure. I think they could easily, 2030, that's 8 years, a long time. And you saw how fast they got up they get up the Chinese factories. Berlin took a little long. I think they learned some lessons there, but the Austin factory was a little faster. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, like I think it's almost a false narrative to think that there is some sort of end state of these being fully ramped. Because I mean, you could have said Fremont was fully ramped like 2 years ago, and it's like, okay, well now they figured out how to get an extra 50% capacity out of that super crammed location.
Hmm.
And Texas in particular, like if you look at the footprint of the land they own compared
Hmm.
to how big that the gigafactory itself is there, there's there's somebody put it together. There's a graphic. There's room for like 7 or 8 different gigafactories on all the land that they own there. so I kind of think it's, maybe, phase one gets to, I don't know, 1 million units, and then there's like a phase two that, builds out another 2-3 million units, and then
Yeah.
I think eventually, what they're going to be trying to focus on is increasing throughput at each of the sites. So this is something Elon talked about on one of the calls many years ago. Was um, your physical footprint is not the only thing that you can like expand to increase capacity. You can also increase throughput. So he was saying
Mhm.
there really isn't any reason that you shouldn't be starting to worry about like the drag on your parts on the conveyor belt. So like he was saying, they should be, at like a brisk walk at a minimum, and they're nowhere near kind of that level of throughput at any of the factories yet. So I think they're always going to be tinkering, and it wouldn't surprise me that like even Fremont could be at like say 1.5 million down the road, which sounds crazy, but I never thought they'd get to 700,000, which they're very nearly at already.
Yeah.
So
Fremont has some like state regulatory issue hurdles that could slow them down and restrict them at cap them a certain amount. That might be hard for them, but in Texas, I think, yeah, Austin could certainly ramp up to 2 million or 3 million total vehicles per year. I could see that. I don't know what kind of regulations there are, issues there are. I would imagine there's similar issues going on in Germany. You've seen them time and again get delayed by all kinds of regulatory red tape, and sort of similar to California. But Texas and China are sort of like the free enterprise, like build as many as you can make, and it's
yeah,
like, great. Well, we don't have to listen to any rules from the local governments about our paint shop, limitations or whatever, uh, bats being disturbed from their hibernation or whatever. So I think he's going to look to build if they choose a new location or a couple of locations. I think a lesson they must have learned is like, let's find somewhere where like the local regulations of the government are not going to impede us on expanding, because that's the main issue with Fremont, and probably will be with Berlin in time, I would imagine too. Let's
yeah.
go to the next question. Yeah. From Mark Gomez Tejada on YouTube, question: what plan B do you expect for Robotaxi if full self-driving is not achieved in 2023? What can be expected for Europe and anti-full self-driving countries and politicians? Matt, do you want to try to take a stab at that one?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure exactly what they mean by that question, but I mean, let's just say that it's not achieved by 2023. Well, I mean, clearly they're already working on hardware 4. We know that. So there's been rumors that seem credible to me that they've got a much higher resolution camera that's going to be part of the hardware 4. They should be pretty close, I would think, to introducing the new chip that they had started working on. I think it was back in 2018, the next generation FSD chip. So regardless of kind of the current iteration, I think it is very clear to me that they're going to have better, like more capable hardware probably by the year 2023. I would imagine hardware 4 with the new FSD chip rolls out. And then they're going to have single stack will be in full use, and then Dojo will be, up and running, presumably at least at a low level at that point. So maybe they hit some local maximum with the current hardware suite. And so in my mind, then it would just shift to hardware 4, which by 2023, I would imagine the rate of improvement would be a lot higher then. So maybe that, you need, I don't know, 10 billion miles of hardware 4 or something like that to actually solve FSD. If that's the case, like, okay, then you've delayed till
Yeah.
2025, but nobody's giving Tesla credit for it anyways. So in my mind, it's kind
Yeah.
of like upside optionality that the market's not pricing in right now if they do solve it before then. But if not, it's not like I'm worried that Cruise is going to like solve general autonomous driving first. But what do you think,
Yeah.
Emmett?
No, I agree with you. I think the full self-driving robo-taxi capability, we've been talking about that for a long time. And um, is it going to be the end of this year, or is it going to be next year, or is it going to be 5 or 7 years away? I don't know for sure. It could be any of those almost equally in my mind. I think the capability though is there, where it just takes a ton of, like, you see all the videos on YouTube of people test driving it, or Matt, you've used it. I use it on the highways, or I use it on the, I don't have full self-driving beta, but even the full self-driving beta, I see whole whole Mars. He's putting his videos up, and I see others up
Yeah.
there. Chuck Cook, he's working on that unprotected left turn. That's like one of the hardest things. It seems like that may not ever get solved. I don't know, but in general practice, just like driving from point A to point B on a normal like errand you're running in the middle of the day, or just going to pick up kids from school or whatever, I feel like you can just turn it on, and it's getting to the point where it's like really comfortable, where maybe you can just like, you have to keep an eye on it, but it's similar to like autopilot on the highway, where you have to keep an eye on it, but you're comfortable enough to let it do its thing. And so I think people are going to pay up for that feature in time when it gets around, when word gets out. Like the Tesla car, the cars in general have a much slower product life cycle than iPhone or iPhones, which are like 1 or 2 years. Cars are like 4 to 6 years. Everyone gets a new car. But people do talk about their cars a lot, right? Just like you talk about your
Yeah.
cool new phone, maybe, but people talk even more about their cool new cars. And so I think the demand is just going to be, we're getting to like this point of the S curve of demand, just from how amazing Tesla cars have been all these years, with, that it's just going to be through the roof. More people are going to buy the software too. And I don't see a problem, to be honest, even if Robo-taxi isn't available. I mean, I think the extra huge bump of the valuation, going to like 5 or 10 trillion could be an extra few years, until that happens. But I could see 3 or 4 trillion valuation even without Robo-taxi in the next couple of years, 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's interesting. Just today I had 2 intervention-free drives, and like 2 months ago, I would like my best drives would be like 5 interventions. So it's like
Wow.
I'm just realizing that now. Like, yeah, I had 2 zero intervention. That would have been like, I would have been like over the moon about that a couple months ago. So I think it
Yeah.
really is improving quite drastically. I do see that in the comments, Mark said that he's talking about if a Model 2 was needed to get to 20 million units instead of a robo-taxi. And
I
and I
don't think
think
so.
that's, yeah,
What
I
do you
don't
think, Matt?
think so either. I mean, if you look at how drastically high their demand is, and I think we're still in the phase where awareness of EVs is it's high now, but it's
Yeah.
still kind of in the early stages, I would think.
Yeah, it's high
There's
in
not more.
California in the Bay Area, but like even like in New York or certain parts of the country, there's like, it's still early days, like really early days. Even where you are, Michigan is probably, you probably see a lot more, but it's nothing compared to like the Bay Area, I'm sure. Like in the Bay Area, I was bringing my kids to school, and there was like 3 white Model Ys in a row. It looked like it was crazy. And you just see a whole ton of Model Ys and Model 3s and Model X's everywhere here. But
Yeah.
when I go other places in the country, it's like a different world. There's like a few you catch once in a while, but it's not nearly as common as here.
Yeah, the electrician who installed my home charger was asking me if the Tesla took gas too. So it's like there's still like just like such a
Yeah.
lack of understanding that I think people are going to start to look at EVs, because especially with gas prices so high, it's just starting to make more and more sense, even with a higher purchase price, and the overall user experience is so much better, that even if they need to just make Model 3s, and like they'll probably try to do a Model 2 maybe at some point, but it's clearly
Mhm.
not as high a priority right now. I think they're
I don't even know
confident
if
that
they
they're gonna.
will. Yeah, I
Yeah,
know
maybe
people talk
not.
about it, like, I know Dave Lee's talked about it too. I kind of think the Model Y is all you need, and they're just gonna. I don't know. I feel like the demand is there. They can
The demand
produce
is
a
nuts.
Yeah, they can produce a ton of Model Ys, and the more they demand, like Wright's law that ARK Investment talks about, the more Model Ys they produce. Plus, with their efficiencies, they can even lower the cost, in a proportional amount as they cumulatively, double their production of Model Ys, and the demand is just going to increase even more. It's just going to be like the Model Y is
Yeah,
just going to like the world. It's just going to eat the auto market if they want to. It's just you
yeah.
have some people buying model prefer sedans, but most people for a similar price would prefer a Model Y, I think. And I think that's just going to be the car. It's going to be, I remember when it was unveiled, it was like so underwhelming, the unveil of the Model Y. Everyone was like, oh, this doesn't look that cool, or he didn't pump it up as much. But I think he knew secretly he didn't want to cannibalize the Model 3 yet. And they were just getting the Model Y going. He knew it was going to be like the thing that was going to just like, take out the rest of the auto market, or the rest of all, it's just the Model Y is like incredible in terms of overall car. It's like everything. So Yeah, I think the Model Y, they can sell 20 million of those globally a year at
You're
this
probably
point.
right. It's such a good car, and the lead times are so long already. Like
Yeah,
it's just crazy. So yeah, I
yeah,
agree. I mean, the new one right now, I'm seeing November 2022 at the earliest. Probably is going to take longer than that, honestly.
yeah, yeah. And they're ramping up production right now too,
Yeah.
ridiculously. So, all right, next question. Let's see. From Martin Muldoon on YouTube, do you have any thoughts on China's reaction to Omicron? It seemed extreme. It did seem extreme. It was a little worrying. What do you think about that, Matt? You're more, you're more familiar with the Chinese government and such.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely extreme. I mean that they're kind of I think at risk of um, you know having some kind of pushback to the like CCP's authoritarianism to some extent. I mean, you saw I think a lot of unhappiness with the citizens of Shanghai who were like running out of food and jumping out of buildings and just like horrible situations, and that's a bit of a self-inflicted wound that the CCP had in my mind, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I think they're much too authoritarian, and but it's tough. Like the people there, generally speaking, I think one of the biggest misconceptions that people have is that like the Chinese people don't support the government and they think the government is too authoritarian. Generally speaking, like the Chinese people actually love the government. They're very proud of what their government has accomplished. And I mean, if you look at the way that their economy has grown and everything, I mean, you can kind of understand that. But then on top of that, there's all the the fact that the government's in charge of the state media and everything like that. So it 100% seems extreme. I mean, there's a lot of it that rubs me very much the wrong way. But I think they kind of backed off enough to kind of risk um, kind of more significant, domestic disturbances. I mean, they're starting to loosen things already, and I think they're gonna find the right balance where they're not pushing people too far.
Yeah, good analysis. I mean, I guess we'll find out. There's pros and cons with the Chinese government. I prefer living in under the U.S. government, but there's pros. I'm sure with the Chinese government being as efficient as they are, or with lots of things they decide to do, that's better for the overall economy, for example. But you know, the lockdown measures that they can enforce, on a whim's notice, are a little troubling to see. But as you said, maybe the people have more faith in the government there than we think they do.
Yeah, I mean, there's the most classic example is that Americans kind of value individual liberty over all else, and I think in China the people value what's good for the collective on the whole or on average, and that's
Mhm.
very much true. And it's a philosophical difference. It's not only from like the Chinese Communist Party that's kind of imposed that. It's it has a lot to do with Confucianism and just kind of ingrained Chinese culture. They put the collective over the individual, and we certainly put the individual over the collective.
All right. I see Elon's a little, before we go to the next question, Elon's a little active on Twitter at the moment. He just said that he just reconfirmed they're going to try to keep as many shareholders as they legally possibly can in Twitter as it goes private. So I wonder how they'll do that. I guess we'll find out more details later. It's probably a bit more complicated than people realize, is my guess, just from understanding financial
Yeah.
regulatory spaces and compliance spaces. It's just it's not going to be a simple task, I don't think. Like you could just create it would be cool if you could just create like a investment vehicle, exchange trade investment vehicle people could buy, which owns Twitter. It would be cool if it was as simple as that, but I think it's going to be much more complex, and I'm not sure they'll be able to do it
Yeah,
easy.
I don't think they'll do that. I mean, the qualified investor rules are so ridiculous in my mind. I mean,
Yeah.
it's it's kind of a
He
shame,
probably could
but
get he could probably get the shadow crew involved. He could probably get them in. He could probably give them each a piece,
I,
but
I thought
I
somebody
don't
said that
know.
somebody
You
in the
said what?
comments said that they view you and I as part of the shadow crew, which is I think a
No.
little too generous. I think we're like the shadow of the shadow. We're a
Yeah.
second level derivative.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think we're Yeah, there's got to be a good metaphor there that's clever and funny, but I can't think of it now. All right, this next question from Evan Glansman. What would you do if you were an owner of Twitter shares and given the option to roll them over once the company goes private? Would you lock up that money? I would certainly keep a portion of shares in Twitter as a private company under Elon's management. I would certainly want to put a portion of my wealth into that, just like I have a portion in SpaceX. Tesla's the top holding and would still be for sure, but I would want a piece of Twitter privately held by Elon. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, especially at $54 a share.
Yeah.
I posted this like historical financial analysis that showed that like their revenues and margins over the last couple of years, and it's like they had this amazing exponential revenue growth, but you can just see that like they're so bloated with their costs that they were never able to gain the operating leverage that Tesla has.
Mm,
Where they're growing revenues exponentially, but they're growing costs linearly, such that they're generating this huge amount of cash flow and margins. Like that's what Elon has done so well in the manufacturing world, which is hard. But Twitter has struggled to do that in the digital world, which should be much easier. So I think Elon's going to take an axe to that place, burn a lot of
yeah.
the fat,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's going to be ugly, I think, for a lot of the employees there. But I think there's a reasonable case to be made that it's irresponsible to let the company get as bloated as they have. And so I think if you are going to hold Twitter over the next 5 or 10 years, I think there's a chance you're going to much more than 10x your money on that investment. So not investment advice, obviously, but it just seems like there's so much low hanging fruit there that
Yeah.
I would definitely like to
Yeah.
hold some shares in there if I could as well.
Yeah. And he's a visionary. Like, look what he did with setting up PayPal, and all the companies he started have done incredible things. I can't wait to see what Twitter does to social media. I just can't wait. Because social media has been one of those things. I think everyone in the back of their minds is like, maybe what if the great filter is social media? Like we're all thinking like, what if somehow social media causes us to self-destruct as a species? And I think, Elon getting control of Twitter reduces that likelihood significantly, in my mind. So yeah, let's just see where it goes. But I'm excited. I'm happy. I'm curious, and I'm looking forward to the impact of social media in the future versus kind of super concerned about it.
Yeah.
From Mark Pullman on the YouTube comments, do you think Tesla will produce solar cells at scale in multiple continents or just in the USA? I think they would do it multiple continents eventually. I think they're still Elon's a perfectionist from what I hear, and I did sit next to a guy who worked at Tesla Solar. Like this was like 4 or 5 years ago. It was like soon after the Solar City announced merger, and I sat next to some guy in a plane that worked at Tesla Solar or Solar. He worked at Solar City and was acquired, and he was I asked him about it, about like the solar panels. Or like, when are they going to? And he said that what he's heard is that Elon's like a perfectionist and keeps sending the tile back to get it redone and redone and redone because he wants it to be perfect. So how many iterations is it until Elon is happy with the solar tile? I don't know, but they've already had a couple different iterations on the production version. So maybe he's waiting to really ramp it up and deploy it more massively. Once the manual labor part is more worked out, but also B, until he's perfectly happy with the actual uh, glass tile itself. Its efficiency, how it looks aesthetically, is especially important to him. And I think it's good for him to be so attention to detail on that. What do you
Yeah,
think, Matt?
I could go off on a 10-minute rant on that, and like there's all the FUD of like the Solar City deal and why he was buying a business where like revenues were going down and all that, and I've always thought that's just like total nonsense, because like that sales model was dying and that product was dying, and he saw the future, but he needed the distribution channel, which Solar City had. um, but anyway, I completely agree with you. Like he's going to get the product right, and once the product is right, that thing is going to sell like crazy, and the margins are going to be phenomenal. But the product is not right yet. Unfortunately, it's taken much longer than it probably should have. But like I based on a lot of thinking about this and my own kind of experience in the energy space, like this is going to be an incredibly disruptive product that most people don't appreciate just how disruptive it's going to be. And if you look at their financials now, it doesn't move the needle, and it hasn't been growing, and the gross margins are terrible. So people just say, well, just don't worry about the energy side of the business. But that's one that they've been working on the product. They're going to keep working on the product, and once it's ready, it's going to just explode. I'm very convinced of that, and I'm not super worried yet that it hasn't happened.
Yeah, I love my solar tile. I have solar tiles on my house I had, a few years ago. I got the first I was the first paying customer in the Bay Area apparently to get the solar roof tiles put on my house then. And it was nice. It was aesthetically, from some angles it looked really nice. From some angles it was like, maybe it's not perfect, but it's okay. I'm happy. It's better than solar panels. And then I
Mhm.
sold that house, and I actually got a premium on the house having two power walls in the garage and the solar roof versus solar panels. So it was I think it paid for itself with the premium I got on selling the house. And then this new house that I moved into 18 months ago, we got the newer version of the solar roof tiles put on, and they look incredible. Like from all angles it looks like a brand new, like kind of shiny, nice looking futuristic roof. Like from all the other roofs in the neighborhood, all the roofs look good in this neighborhood, I guess, but this roof stands out, and it stands out in a good way to me. Like it certainly stands out though, but in a good way where it's like, wow, that roof, there's something special about it. It looks nice. And
Yeah.
so aesthetically, I'm happy with the version I have. I'm sure there's other things he's doing to make it even better, but yeah, it's really an incredible product, and it's definitely increases the value of people's houses, depending where you live, by potentially more than you pay to get the solar roof put on your house. So yeah, let's go to the last question here. It's been about an hour. So this is all recorded on Twitter Spaces and YouTube Live for anyone who wants to go back to it. So last question from EV Passion on YouTube. After the Twitter buyout, aren't you afraid that Elon will embark on other new projects that will lead him to sell more Tesla shares and focus less on the transition to renewable energy? I don't. I'm not worried about Elon losing focus. He's got more. If anything, he's too focused and doesn't get enough sleep, or doesn't focus on his physical health enough. Maybe I think I'm not worried about him losing focus on new business ventures. To help the world, or just to create new businesses and value in businesses. Um, every time, whether it was him being on the board, he was the chairman of the board of Solar City way back, and people thought that was too much for him to be on Solar City and try to run Tesla. So he's done a lot of things at multiple multitasking. SpaceX, he's always done that, and there's advantages to that. People just assume that being on multiple boards is just a kind of a dilution of one's focus, to each of them. But maybe there's net advantages to doing multiple businesses at the same time. He can carry things he's learned from SpaceX, obviously, to producing the Tesla cars or manufacturing the Tesla cars, carry things from Twitter interaction AI software to make the software better in the Tesla cars somehow. I think that almost the more Elon gets involved in, that he's willing to bite off himself and take on. I think he's a big boy, and he knows what he can do and what he can't. And it's almost bullish to me in a way, maybe these days, the more things he decides personally that he wants to get engaged in and willing to do. That's different. What's your take, Matt?
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, like, I think if you look at his past, he's demonstrated an ability to handle this, and I think one of the things that people don't think about is, he was involved in kind of the founding of OpenAI, and he
Yes.
probably could have like fallen on his sword and kept that as like a nonprofit the way that he wanted to, but I think he rightly prioritized his focus to be on SpaceX and on Tesla and the other kind of core products, and he just kind of let his involvement on OpenAI go. And so I trust his ability to, focus on the things that he needs to focus on. And if Twitter is going to be some huge distraction to, quote unquote core missions, then I would think that he'll be more than capable of kind of offloading his time commitment on that. Whether that means actually selling his share or whatever, or just being less involved. I think he's demonstrated a clear capacity to make those kind of judgment calls and make them very well.
Yeah, as incredible of an engineer Elon is, he might be an even better delegator. Like, I've never seen anyone delegate to the extreme productiveness that Elon has. Like, I keep thinking to the term George Hott said on a interview way back, where he said he's never seen such an incredible, like, mass marshal of resources as what Elon does. Like,
Yeah.
Elon can delegate. Like, I have trouble. Everyone else, I think most people have trouble delegating and trusting other people with work. They know how it should be done or whatever. But Elon somehow has conquered that. And, there's no way he understands all the stuff, but he knows who to put in charge of things. He knows how to keep tabs on those people. He knows how to dive in when needed. I don't know anyone else, in history that's been tested with as much delegation as Elon is, and doing as
Yeah.
well with it, to be honest.
Yeah, and one example of that is like the full self-driving kind of issue that's been perennially delayed, right? But if you look back, was it 2-3 years ago, there was this huge kind of shakeup on the team that he had involved there, because he could tell they were not going in the right direction and didn't really see his vision, or didn't think his vision was possible. So he had to like get rid of the whole team and become the point person on the AI portion of Tesla's business,
Yeah.
on top of like a very difficult time ramping Model 3 and everything. So the fact that he's been able to do that so well, and now he's got the right team in place, that he doesn't have to be as hands-on involved. So I agree with you that like he can get the right team involved, and then that allows him to back off a little bit and focus on other areas of his empire.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So, all right. With that, we'll end this week's episode. We'll be back same time, same places next week, and hope everyone's doing well. Hope the sound quality on YouTube is better for me. This time I took some suggestions of critical feedback into account on recent comments. So anyway, leave your comments
Are
on
you
there.
off
We
next
read
week,
them.
Emmett? Is that right?
Next week I'm not off. The week after
You're
that
not
I'm
off.
off.
Okay.
Yeah.
The week
Yeah,
after that.
yeah,
All right.
yeah. Yeah.
All right.
So,
Well, same.
but you and I,
Then
Matt,
you were right. Same
we'll
time,
be
same
here.
place.
Yeah, yeah. And the week after that, I think you're going to have a guest host. We're working on for me to work with you for that live stream.
Yeah,
I hope.
Farzad's gonna come on. Actually, he's already
Oh,
agreed to
great,
come on.
Farzad.
So
Great.
yeah,
And just
Farzad,
so
if you're
everyone knows,
on.
yeah, Farzad, he's on the comments. He'll be here in a couple of weeks. That's awesome. And also, we have a really interesting. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag. I don't want to spill the beans, but we have a really cool interview. I'm the most pumped for in my history of doing this in the last year. I'm excited for this interview that we're doing. We're recording it, I think, tomorrow. We'll release it later this week. But this person is monumental in the financial business. Anyway, that's all. I'll leave it at. He's some people. We'll leave it at that. We'll do it.
It's not
tomorrow,
Elon, though.
and it's not Elon.
Temper
No, no.
expectations in that way.
Yeah, but I'm super excited we got this guy on. We'll probably release it later in the week. All right, thanks, guys. We'll